Congratulations. You've just slipped under the sheets, expecting sleep, silence, maybe a dream or two. But instead, you've traveled. Not far, just 500 years back, give or take. It's the year 1513. The candles are low, the ink's still wet. You're standing. No, you're watching from the edge of a dimly lit chamber inside a fortress on the edge of the world. Istanbul, once Constantinople, once the center of everything. The walls smell of salt and sweat, old parchment and sandalwood. There's a breeze, faint, humming through a cracked window, carrying the brine of the distant Bosphorus and the rustle of forgotten conversations. At a wooden desk, hunched like a priest before a sacred text, sits a man. Pyre Reese, cartographer, admiral, historian, and, whether he knows it or not, guardian of a riddle that no one has solved in 5 centuries. His hands are careful, reverent. They move across the parchment like a lover tracing skin. A curve here, a line there. Ink bleeds into fibrous paper, drawing shorelines, contours, whispers of continents. And then he does something that should be impossible. He draws Antarctica, not as we know it. No ice, just raw coastline, jagged and exposed. A shape only revealed by sonar scans in the 20th century. And yet, here it is, beneath his fingers, in a world where compasses still lie and sailors still pray to survive the night. You blink. Maybe you're imagining it. Maybe the candlelight is playing tricks on you, dancing across the map with theatrical mischief. But no, this isn't your imagination. The map exists. You could touch it if you dared. It's known today as the Pyre Reese map, and historians will spend decades denying what it seems to show. Some say he copied earlier maps. Some say he guessed. Others, quieter voices, the kind who speak in back rooms and dusty corners of libraries, whisper that what he drew came from memory. Not his own, but someone's. Outside, the night is deep and ancient. The stars haven't changed, but the world below them has. Empires rise, maps redraw themselves like anxious children, and memory slips through the cracks. Pyre's ink is different. It doesn't map just space, it maps time. And somewhere within the gentle arc of that forgotten coastline lies a question. Who saw Antarctica without its ice? Your skin prickles. Maybe it's the chill. Maybe it's something older. You lean closer. The parchment smells of cinnamon and mold. Its edges are torn, as if resisting the truth they carry. The map shows South America curling to the east, far more accurately than any European should have known. There are annotations, notes in Ottoman Turkish, referencing lost sailors and ancient sources. One of them says, "This part is drawn from the map of Columbus." Another, "These coasts were known in the time of Alexander." But Alexander never sailed that far. Did he? The candle flickers. The map doesn't flinch. In the silence, you begin to feel it. Not just curiosity, but awe. As if you're not looking at a map at all, but a portal. Not to a place, to a memory. One that doesn't belong to Pyre. One that doesn't belong to anyone. And yet lives inside all of us like a dream we almost remember. Because some maps don't just show where we are. They remind us where we came from. And sometimes what we chose to forget. So tonight, forget about sleep. You're already dreaming. And the dream has just begun. You're still there. The candle hasn't gone out yet. The map is still on the table, pinned at the corners by stones the color of forgotten blood. Outside, the wind shifts slightly, bringing the scent of salt and maybe cloves. The city beyond the walls sleeps, but not you. Not tonight, because something's wrong with this map. Not just what it shows, but how it shows it. Let's be clear. In 1513, ink is a slow, sacred thing. It's not your ballpoint convenience. It's made from iron salts, crushed oak galls, maybe a touch of soot, stirred with vinegar or wine. It stains fingers for days, smells like rust and earth, and once it touches parchment, it lives there longer than kings. So when Pyre's hand moves across the page, it isn't random. Each line is a vow. Each stroke is a trace of something he believes to be true. But here's the problem. He shouldn't know any of this. Cartographers of his time had crude outlines of the known world, distorted, bloated, as if drawn from rumor, not from observation. Most maps of that era placed sea monsters where their knowledge ended. Here Be Dragons wasn't metaphor, it was cartographic honesty. And yet Pyre draws coastlines with uncanny precision. Shorelines of South America that modern satellites barely corrected. And further south, Antarctica, as it looked before, was buried in ice 10,000 years ago. How? You shift in your chair, an old Ottoman cushion, threadbare and warm from your weight. You lean forward. On the lower margins of the map, inked in elegant Ottoman Turkish, he explains, I used about 20 charts and mappamundi, some from the time of Alexander, some drawn by the Portuguese infidels. He doesn't claim invention. He claims inheritance. But from whom? What ancient hands passed down these ghostly geographies century after century, unbroken through war, fire, collapse? It's here the ink becomes dangerous, because knowledge has a half-life. Maps decay, parchments burn, but this one survived. Or maybe it wanted to survive. And you, dear traveler, might wonder, how does a sailor of the 16th century get access to knowledge so precise it mirrors NASA's own readings? He didn't. Not directly. He copied. But what he copied, that's the mystery. And here's where the scholars get nervous. Because when logic fails, mythology begins. Some claim the source maps came from Alexandria before it burned. Others say they came from Carthaginian traders who mapped the seas long before Rome swallowed them. Some even whisper of a civilization older than Egypt, long vanished, that once mapped the world's coastlines with eyes far keener than ours. A civilization, perhaps, that Plato hinted at. Atlantis? No, not the crystal-powered utopia from late-night documentaries. Something grittier, more human, more tragic. A seafaring power, advanced, proud, and doomed. What if their maps didn't die with them? What if one found its way into a Phoenician vault, then into an Egyptian archive, then into a Roman chest, then into the dusty library of a Moorish scholar, and finally into the hands of a curious Ottoman admiral with enough audacity to draw what he did not understand? Ink travels, but stories sail. And tonight, you are aboard one of those ships. Your bed, its mast, your breath, its wind. The sea beneath you is made of centuries, and Pyre's map is your compass. But remember, this isn't just geography. It's memory. The kind too old for textbooks. The kind that survives only because someone, somewhere couldn't forget. And neither, it seems, can you. The map still rests on the table, ink faded slightly now, as if it too were growing tired with the centuries. But you're not tired yet. Not really. Your eyes adjust to the candle's slow rhythm. Its flame leans toward the east, toward Egypt, as if it remembers something or someone. Let's go there. Not the Egypt of postcards or museum replicas. No golden sarcophagi or Instagram pyramids. No, let's go to Alexandria. Not the city as it is today, crowded, tired, burdened with modern noise. But the Alexandria that burned. Imagine it. A harbor lit by the flames of the great lighthouse. Pharos, taller than any skyscraper, throwing light over the darkened sea like a god holding back the night. Streets paved in marble. Books in every language, none of them printed. The scent of ink, linen, papyrus, myrrh. And silence. that sacred silence only found in places that believe themselves eternal. In the heart of it all, the Library of Alexandria. It wasn't just a building. It was a brain, the collected mind of the known world, pulsing with secrets, histories, dreams, and perhaps maps. Scholars from Greece, Babylon, India, Egypt, Carthage. They came like pilgrims, some barefoot, some in silk, all of them looking for one thing, truth. But truth is dangerous when written down. And books, as it turns out, burn beautifully. No one knows for sure how it ended. Some blame Julius Caesar. Others say Christian zealots or Muslim conquerors. But perhaps like most deaths, it wasn't one fire, but many small ones over time. Ashes don't keep dates. Still, the idea persists that before the last scroll turned to smoke, something, a few things, escaped. And here's where the whispers begin. They say that when the fires rose, a handful of scribes fled, clutching bundles of papyri, diagrams, maps too fragile to fold. They ran into the desert, or boarded ships, or traded knowledge for safety in Moorish courts, in Byzantine monasteries, in Ottoman halls. Some say they carried not just wisdom, but memory, maps of coastlines no longer visible, atlases of worlds already drowned, charts that pointed subtly not north or south, but back in time, back to Atlantis. You hear it again, that name. It's becoming a song in your mind, low and steady. Atlantis, not glittering in marble and gold, but crumbling, buried beneath sediment and salt. The kind of place desperate men map, not to conquer, but to remember. Could Pyrie Reese's source have been a copy of a copy of a copy of a map once shelved in Alexandria? A drawing, not by a man, but by a survivor of the flood, of the fall, of forgetting. The air shifts again. You can smell parchment faintly burnt. You can feel the weight of centuries, pages turning themselves without hands. And just for a moment, you hear it. Not a scream, but a whisper, soft, papery, like a voice trying to reach you through layers of history. We tried to remember, it says. We wrote it down. We mapped the end. Maybe the library didn't die. Maybe it fractured, splintered into legends, secret collections, dusty shelves in places no longer marked on any modern map. Maybe you don't need to find Alexandria. Maybe it's already inside you, whispering every time something in you aches for the past without knowing why. You lie back, eyes still open, and now the stars above feel heavier, older, as if they too are part of the story. After all, they were watching. When Atlantis fell, when Alexandria burned, when Pyrie drew, they watched. And tonight, so do you. Still awake? Good, because you're going to need all your senses now. The night has thickened outside the Admiral's chamber. The oil in the lamp flickers low, casting shadows like ribs across the map. And there at the bottom of the page, quietly defying reason, is a curve of land you shouldn't be seeing. Antarctica. Not the Antarctica you think you know, the sterile, frozen void of satellite images and weather stations. No, this is raw coastline, sharp ridges, smooth bays, rocky formations. It's naked, exposed, and drawn impossibly with precision. You might be wondering, how can that be? Because Antarctica, as we understand it, has been entombed beneath miles of ice for over 6,000 years. Long before compasses, before copper tools, before written language. And yet, here it is, outlined in 1513 by the steady hand of a man who'd never seen it. A man born centuries too late. A man who shouldn't even have known it existed. The map is silent, but you feel it pressing against your breath. As if it's watching you, not the other way around. And then comes the modern part of the story, the part that shouldn't exist either. The United States Air Force conducts a study of ancient maps, looking for historical knowledge that might aid in Cold War strategy. They examine the Pyrie Reese map, expecting quaint inaccuracies. Instead, they freeze, because the coastline of Antarctica, as drawn by Pyrie, matches seismic readings taken by sonar from deep ice radar. It aligns, not with the surface, but with the bedrock beneath the ice. A topography only revealed by science in the 20th century, but drawn 447 years earlier. Let that settle in. You're looking at something that shouldn't be there. And the more you stare, the more disturbing it becomes. Because if Pyrie copied from older sources, as he claimed, then those sources were created by someone who saw Antarctica before it froze. But who and when? You inhale. The air in the chamber is heavier now, as if it's not oxygen, but memory you're breathing. Some suggest a lost seafaring civilization, prehistoric navigators who charted the globe with instruments we can't even replicate. Others speak of survivors, Atlanteans perhaps, who escaped the flood with maps hidden in clay pots, passed from hand to hand until they reached the scribes of Egypt, the monks of Byzantium, and finally, Pyrie. But you know, the truth is slipperier than that. Because this isn't just a question of how. It's a question of why. Why would someone draw Antarctica before it was ice? There's a theory whispered late at night in university basements and old bookshops that Antarctica wasn't always in the south. That the Earth, like a restless sleeper, shifted on its axis thousands of years ago. Pole displacement, a slippage, and what was once a temperate paradise became a frozen tomb. If that's true, then perhaps Antarctica didn't freeze until after Atlantis fell. Perhaps they were neighbors. Perhaps they traded. Perhaps they remembered each other. Imagine tall ships with white sails docking along Antarctic shores. Temples of stone lit by violet sunsets. Cartographers with tools you wouldn't recognize. Ink made from minerals mined from places we no longer remember. And then it ended. A flood. A war. A shift. We don't know. All we have is the map. A ghost pressed into parchment. A curve of land drawn by a man who shouldn't have known it existed, but did. And now, so do you. You feel a chill, not from the Antarctic wind, but from the knowing that somewhere beneath the ice, beneath the snow and time and silence, there might still be walls, statues, books, waiting. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to listen to the frozen hum of a land that once was warm, to the buried songs of a civilization that once mapped the world and then disappeared beneath its own creation. Antarctica, she wasn't always snow, and perhaps she isn't finished speaking. You open your eyes, but you're no longer in Istanbul. The map is gone, the candle extinguished, the air changed. Now there is marble beneath your feet, cool, veined, whispering. You hear sandals scrape across stone and a voice, low and measured, echoing through a colonnade. There was an island, he says, larger than Libya and Asia combined. You know the voice. You've heard it before in college lectures and dusty philosophy books. But never like this. Never like you're here beside him. Plato, not the caricature, not the statue, but a man in his mid-70s, eyes still sharp with memory, with mischief. He's not speaking to you directly, not yet. He's speaking to his student, Critias, telling a tale within a tale. A story that doesn't belong to him, he insists. No, he's just repeating it. And here's where it gets strange. Because Plato doesn't claim to have invented Atlantis. He blames someone else. Solon, the Athenian lawgiver. A real man. A politician. A poet. And, according to Plato, a traveler to Egypt who returned not only with tan lines and papyrus, but with a story, a memory. Solon spoke with Egyptian priests, keepers of histories written not on scrolls, but on stone, passed down unbroken for 9,000 years. And these priests, amused by Solon's pride in Greek culture, laughed gently and said, "Oh, Solon, you Greeks are like children. You remember nothing." Because the Greeks, for all their wisdom, had forgotten the flood, forgotten the war, forgotten Atlantis. Plato didn't say Atlantis was myth. He said it was history, just very, very old. An empire beyond the pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. A naval power, magnificent, arrogant, and doomed. In the tale, Atlantis is not merely a place. It is a warning, a mirror, a civilization that, in its hunger for more power, more territory, more glory, lost itself. And the gods, watching silently, finally acted. One night, one day, gone, swallowed by the sea. Now pause. Really think about this. Plato was no fool. He wasn't some esoteric mystic. He was methodical, logical, and yet, of all the stories he could have invented or chosen, he chose this one to embed in his philosophical dialogues. Why? Because Atlantis, for him, wasn't just an anecdote. It was a parable about memory, about how civilizations rise, forget, and fall. It's a dangerous dream because it feels true, too true, as if it isn't just about them, but about us. About anyone who builds towers so high, they forget to watch the waterline. You look around. The colonnade fades. Plato's voice softens, but the words stay with you, lingering like perfume on ancient stone. There was an island. And yet, you feel it, don't you? The weight of that past pressing against your ribs, asking to be remembered. Atlantis doesn't scream from the annals of history. It whispers through philosophy, through geometry, through maps drawn by men who never knew why they were drawing them. A continent that may never have existed, and yet somehow left fingerprints everywhere. You lie back, not on a bed, but on the soft sands of a shore you cannot name. Stars blink above you, old and different. The tide draws near, and in that gentle hiss of foam and salt, you think you hear it again. A city, crumbling, calling. Plato may have written the story, but something wrote it first, and it wants you to remember. You're no longer on the shore. You're beneath it. The sea is thick above your head, mute, ancient, pressing down like a forgotten god's hand. And around you ruins, columns broken like snapped ribs, statues leaning into the dark, their faces soft from centuries of salt and sorrow. Stone roads that lead nowhere, archways that frame only the void. This is Atlantis, but not as poets imagined it. No gleaming utopia, no crystal towers or flying machines. Only silence, sediment, and the bones of a civilization that destroyed itself. Because Atlantis, according to Plato, did not fall from war. It fell from within. They had everything: rich soil, warm climate, abundant metal, fresh water, fertile fields. Even elephants, yes, elephants wandering under foreign stars. And for a time, they lived with balance, harmony, order. But then came the hunger. Not for food, not for knowledge, but for more power, more land, more tribute, more worship. They began to look beyond their shores, not to explore, but to own. The gods, watching, withdrew their favor, not with fire, not yet, but with forgetfulness. The Atlanteans forgot who they were. They forgot their laws, their purpose, their restraint. And in that forgetting, they lost everything. Plato's words are chillingly precise. The divine portion in them began to fade away, and their human nature gained the upper hand. Isn't that how it always begins? Not with explosions, but with pride, with mirrors that lie, with men who believe they become gods. The destruction came suddenly. One night, one day, the earth shook, the seas roared, and the island, its palaces, its temples, its gardens, disappeared beneath the waves. No war, no invaders, just the planet correcting a mistake. And now, here you are, walking through their streets. You can feel the silt under your bare feet. You can hear the faint echo of voices, too distorted to understand, too recent to ignore. A child laughing, a forge hammer ringing, a prayer whispered too late. Was a myth? Perhaps. But here's the thing about myths. They don't arise from nothing. They are fossils of truth, buried beneath metaphor, time, and denial. You can call it Atlantis, or you can call it Babylon, or Rome, or Pompeii, or any place that grew too large to remember its own soul. This isn't just their story, it's ours, because every generation thinks it's the first to touch the stars, until the sky reminds them they're dust. Atlantis is the dream of perfection, and the nightmare of forgetting, the dream that we can build paradise, and the fear that we'll lose it, not to enemies but to ourselves. The sea around you darkens. It's not threatening, not cruel, only quiet, like a parent too tired to argue. And from the depths, you hear sound. Not a cry, not a scream, but a sigh, as if the city, even now, mourns its own mistake. You begin to rise, not swimming, floating, drawn back to the surface by the breath of the living. But before you break the water, you look back once more. Atlantis is still there, not dead, just sleeping, waiting for the next civilization bold enough to forget. You wake floating, not in a bed, not even in water, but in memory, unmoored, adrift the way land used to be before we told it to stay still. Beneath you, the earth breathes slowly. Continents drift in a sleepwalk. Mountains push upward like bones trying to break the skin. And the sea doesn't forget. It simply rearranges. You've heard it said that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the ancients' name for what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, that narrow throat where the Atlantic kisses the Mediterranean, impatient and eternal. So we assume, don't we, that Atlantis must have been somewhere in the Atlantic, west of Spain, south of Portugal, perhaps near the Azores, a cluster of volcanic islands that jut out like broken teeth. But what if the island moved? No, not in some supernatural flight. No engine, no levitation, just the slow, grinding ballet of plate tectonics, forgotten by bedtime stories, but carved into every continent's bones. Because the earth shifts, it rolls, it heaves in its sleep, and sometimes the land you stand on today used to be under the sea. Sometimes entire islands rise from the ocean like Lazarus, only to sink again centuries later. They are born screaming with lava and ash. They die in silence, slipping beneath the surface like a guilty secret. Atlantis could have been one of those. A microcontinent, they call it. A fragment of the Earth's crust, torn from its mother plate, floating alone. There's even a name, Mauritia, discovered beneath the Indian Ocean. Evidence of land masses swallowed whole. Why should the Atlantic be any different? In fact, seismic surveys have shown strange formations on the ocean floor. Ridges, terraces, walls. Too geometric, too deliberate. Some say they're natural. Some say they're ruins. And in the Azores, submerged just off the coast, lies a megalithic structure shaped like a pyramid. Not proven, not disproven, just there beneath the waves like a thought the ocean hasn't finished yet. But here's what disturbs more than the possibility of Atlantis existing. It's the idea that it didn't stay where we left it. You see, we think of continents as permanent, stable. We draw borders as if tectonic plates care. But the truth is, everything moves. Your bed? Floating. Your home? Drifting. Every map you've ever trusted is temporary. So maybe Atlantis didn't just fall. Maybe it slipped. Maybe the cataclysm wasn't only a flood, but a rearrangement. A tectonic shrug. A ripple that pulled the seabed like a tablecloth and dropped Atlantis, whole, into a trench so deep even sonar trembles to touch it. And now, maybe it's still moving. Below you. Far below. Shifting like a sleeper, pulling a blanket of water tight against its chin. Because some places don't die. They sink. And some stories don't end. They just relocate. You breathe slowly now. Because the earth isn't still. It rolls beneath you like an old giant stirring in his dreams. And somewhere, far out of sight, a city sleeps upside down, its pillars pointing at fish, its statues collecting coral. The island moved. Maybe not just once. And maybe, just maybe, it's coming back. Not by magic, but by movement. One tectonic side at a time. You've set foot on land again, but not the kind you trust. It squelches under your heel, soft and thick and ancient. Mud, dense with time, rich with secrets. Not the manicured soil of gardens or the sunlit loam of farms. This is story soil, black and damp and patient. The kind that eats memory and grows myth. You're somewhere between Morocco and Portugal, though the borders are meaningless here. This land isn't bound by flags or names, only by layers of clay, of sand, of silt, of silence. And somewhere beneath your feet, bones. Not skeletons in rows, not neat museum displays. Just shards, fragments. A femur here, a tooth cracked by pressure. Tools, chipped from stone, shaped by hands now dust. They've been pulled from swamps, from underwater caves, from marshes once dry, now drowned. And every time they surface, they whisper things that don't fit. Things like, humans lived here before the flood. These walls are older than our history books say history began. We built, we farmed, we sailed, and then the sea came. In southern Spain, ruins rest quietly under layers of sediment, arranged too deliberately to be natural. Satellite images show rectangular patterns buried deep beneath the marshlands of Dinana, a nature reserve now, but once, maybe a harbor. Local legend has always called this place Tartessos, a lost city, a kingdom of gold, poetry, and ships. Ancient Greeks spoke of it. Herodotus, that old gossip, mentioned it. The Romans, even they seem to know it was there. And when explorers dig, what do they find? Walls, jewelry, trade goods from cultures that shouldn't have known each other. And deeper still, mud. Always the mud. It clings to the truth like skin. It coats time like a burial shroud. Go further west, and you'll find the Azores, lonely islands scattered across the mid-Atlantic like stepping stones between now and never. Volcanic, jagged, breathtaking. But beneath them, divers whisper of stone roads and underwater platforms. Not coral, not volcanic, carved. They tell stories of diving too deep and finding blocks arranged in lines, like the foundation of something that once stood tall and proud and then fell asleep beneath the tide. Nothing is confirmed, of course. Nothing ever is. But then, what's confirmation in a world where we still can't explain how the pyramids were built? You kneel in the mud. Touch it. It smells like salt and iron and something older than civilization. You close your eyes, and the stories come. A shepherd in Mauritania who swears the stones on his land don't belong to nature. A fisherman near Cadiz who brings up pottery with every net. A tooth, human, perfectly fossilized, found in strata predating known settlement by thousands of years. Mud doesn't care about your textbooks. It's not here to prove anything. It's here to keep. But sometimes, under the right moon, in the hands of someone who listens instead of looks. It gives back, and what it gives is never need, never whole, just enough to haunt. A wall without a roof, a road with no origin, a myth buried in a layer of ash that shouldn't be there. You rise, the mud lets go, reluctantly, and you understand something now, something that can't be unlearned. Atlantis isn't just a city, it's a pattern, a memory etched into landscapes all over the world. And those memories, they don't live in books, they live in the dirt. So the next time someone says, there's no evidence, look at their shoes. If they're clean, they haven't gone deep enough. Atlantis is out there, not floating above the waves, but underneath them, waiting in the mud, sleeping in the bones, draped in myths that feel just a little too real. Hold your breath. You won't need it for long, but you should feel what it's like. Imagine lungs filled not with air, but with salt, with silence, with history liquefied. That's how Atlantis died, they say. Not in war, not in glory, but gasping. Because when water comes, it doesn't debate. It doesn't vote. It doesn't negotiate with kings or spare temples carved by trembling hands. It just rises. And when it fills your mouth, your eyes, your cities, there are no speeches. Only the sound of statues tipping over, bricks tearing from mortar, streets becoming rivers, then graves. Close your eyes. You're there now, just before the end. The sky is low, dark like bruised fruit. A wind has risen from nowhere, dragging dust and whispers through narrow alleys once vibrant with voices. You walk through a marketplace, empty, stalls abandoned, baskets of figs overturned, their sweetness now for the sea. In the distance, a temple stands crooked, leaning as if listening to the earth. But the earth doesn't speak. It shakes. Suddenly, the ground stumbles. A scream, far away, then another, closer. The sky cracks open. Birds fly in spirals. Dogs howl, and the water begins to climb. Not a wave, a wall. The ocean no longer horizontal. You run. But where do you go when the ground itself sinks? Some try to climb trees. Some pray. Some gather loved ones and stare into the rising blue like it might give them back the hours they wasted. But water has no nostalgia. Within minutes, the city is swallowed. Not gently, but with violence. Like the sea had been waiting, starving, for centuries to reclaim what had always been hers. Now you're under. Everything is muted. Colors dissolve. And the final breath of a world becomes nothing more than bubbles rising past broken pillars. Salt fills your lungs, not just in this vision, but in your lineage. Because we are the descendants of survivors, of the ones who didn't drown. And the ones who did, they live on, not in stone, not in scripture, but in stories, in warnings dressed as myth, in whispers carved into cave walls, and bedtime tales told to children whose mothers remembered too much. You float there between memory and mourning, and you start to wonder, what does a civilization feel in its final seconds? Pride? Regret? Nothing at all. They say Atlantis fell because it forgot itself, because it loved what it had built more than what it believed, because it made gods of mirrors. And the sea? She noticed. She always notices. She waits, patient and wide-eyed, listening for the sound of ambition breaking through the soil. And when it comes, she returns, not as punishment, but as balance. Because the ocean doesn't hate. She simply remembers. And she remembers everything. Every stone placed with arrogance. Every law written in hunger. Every moment a man mistook power for permanence. That's the taste in the water. Not salt, but memory. You rise again, back toward air, your lungs aching for the present. But a part of you stays below, buried in coral, tangled in kelp, tucked inside the ruins of a city that couldn't stop building, even as the tide rose. The flood came, the city sank, and the sea exhaled. And even now, tonight, it's hard to tell if what we lost was a place or a lesson. You're dry now, or so you think, but there's still salt behind your ears, still ocean in your dreams. Atlantis hasn't let go. Not really. It just stepped aside because the next clue doesn't float. It's buried in sand, in stone, in geometry. And to find it, you must walk east, away from the sea, into the yawning mouth of the desert. Egypt, not the Egypt of postcards. No camels pose in front of pyramids. No tour guides rehearsing mystery into mediocrity. This is older, rawer. You walk beneath the shadow of the Giza Plateau, where the air smells of limestone and legacy, where silence has weight. The Great Pyramid looms, not a ruin, but a calculation made visible. It doesn't reach toward the sky in desperation. It aligns. Each side faces a cardinal direction, north, south, east, west, with a precision that mocks modern compasses. Its base is almost perfectly level, despite being built without concrete. Its angles form mathematical relationships, still debated in lecture halls. Golden ratios. Pi, the speed of light. Yes, light. You heard that right. The latitude of the pyramid, 29.9792 degrees north, matches the exact speed of light in meters per second, 299,792,458. Coincidence? Maybe, but the desert doesn't trade in coincidences. It trades in memory. You enter the pyramid, not as a tourist, but as a listener. The air cools, dust stirs like breath, and down you go, through passageways too narrow for pharaohs, too precise for chance. You don't find treasure. You find data, angles, ratios, distances between chambers that echo stellar alignments. The Great Pyramid isn't a tomb. It's a machine, a message, carved in a language of mathematics. And what does it say? Some believe it's a cosmic map. Others say it encodes the dimensions of Earth. Its curvature, its mass, its orbit. But then why? Why would Bronze Age builders embed such advanced knowledge into stone? Here's where the whispers begin again. Because Egypt, for all her majesty, did not claim to have invented her knowledge. She claimed to have inherited it from a time before. From a first time, Zeptepi, as they called it. A golden age when gods walked the earth and civilization was gifted, not grown. An age drowned by flood. An age ended. Sound familiar? It should, because the Egyptians hinted over and over that their knowledge was recovered, not discovered, that their gods, Thoth, the scribe of time and measure, the inventor of writing and math, wasn't a god in the divine sense, but a rememberer, a keeper of what came before. And maybe that's what the pyramids are. Not monuments to kings, but monuments to memory. Stone libraries designed to outlive floods, fires, wars, and forgetfulness. A way of saying, this is how it was. This is what we knew. Don't lose it again. And hidden within that memory, if you know how to listen, might be the outline of Atlantis. Not in name, but in shape, in scale, in proportion. Because geometry isn't just math. In the ancient world, it was sacred. It was the shape of the cosmos, the shape of truth. And truth, unlike stone, is slippery. So the pharaohs didn't write essays. They built equations you could walk through. They encoded myths into angles and buried warnings in ratios. Not to worship themselves, but to pass on what they were once given. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were given those gifts by survivors. By wanderers who came from a sunken kingdom, carrying nothing but memory. You step back into the sunlight. The sand blinds you, but only for a moment. The pyramid casts a long shadow, one that stretches not just across desert, but across time. You look again, and suddenly, you don't see a monument. You see a map. Not of places, but what we lost. The gods are angry. No, not the quiet, abstract deities of modern imagination. Not the kind you only meet in metaphors or on bumper stickers. These gods are loud, visceral. They bleed. They burn. And in the ancient world, when something colossal collapsed, when a mountain split open or a city vanished overnight, it wasn't called a natural disaster. It was called the judgment. You're standing now on a high cliff in the Aegean Sea. Wind howling past your ears like a voice trying to reach you across 3,000 years. Below, the island of Santorini, once called Thera, glitters like broken glass scattered in a circle. What you see is beautiful. What happened here was not. Roughly 1600 BCE, the island exploded. Not trembled, not cracked, exploded. The entire center of the island, gone in seconds. Volcanic, ash-buried civilizations as far as Egypt. The tsunami? Hundreds of feet tall. It would have hit the northern coast of Crete in under an hour, drowning palaces, flooding temples, erasing entire towns without so much as a scream. Some say this was the real Atlantis. The Minoans, elegant, artistic, maritime geniuses, disappeared not with swords in their hands, but with water in their lungs. And to the people who survived, watching from distant shores as the sea rose up and ate a city, what else could it be but divine wrath? The gods, they said, had spoken. And what they said was no. Now lean closer. This is where it gets strange. In Plato's tale, Atlantis falls in a single day and night of misfortune. Thera's eruption? It happened fast. So fast, in fact, that many of the buildings archaeologists unearthed in Akrotiri, the ancient city buried under ash, still had paintings on the walls, beds made, food on plates. People didn't abandon it. They were taken. But here's what haunts. In those frescoes preserved by the ash, frozen in time, you see something else. Not panic, not fear. You see order, processions, rituals. A people who thought they understood the rhythms of their world. Right until the sky fell. It's hard not to draw a line between them and Atlantis. A culture at its peak, technologically advanced, in harmony with the sea, until it wasn't. And here's where the Titans come in. In Greek myth, the Titans were older than the gods. Raw, elemental forces, born of chaos. And when Zeus finally cast them down, he didn't just defeat them, he buried them. Some say the Titans weren't metaphors at all. They were memories. Memories of an age before recorded history. Before Olympus. Before the flood. An age when the world was ruled not by small men with crowns, but by civilizations that bent metal, mapped stars, and challenged the sky. Atlantis wasn't just punished for being proud. It was punished for playing God. Some myths say Poseidon, god of the sea, was Atlantis' protector. He gave them the island, taught them architecture, agriculture, maybe even geometry. But when they used his gifts to dominate others, when they forgot gratitude and worship and replaced it with empire, he turned the ocean on them. His wrath wasn't petty. It was elemental. That's what divine punishment meant back then. Not plague or exile, but being unmade, wiped clean, like chalk on whetstone. Now you might say, surely, these are just stories. Fairy tales dressed in togas. Volcanoes erupt, tectonic plates shift. Where's the mystery? But then you remember, Plato didn't call Atlantis a myth. He called it true history, transmitted by priests, preserved in temples older than his country. And the Greeks? They wrote things down because they feared forgetting. And what they feared most was that what had happened to Atlantis could happen again. So they left you warnings, woven into tragedies, carved into temples, painted onto pots. Not about monsters with teeth, but about the monsters we become when we forget our place in the world. You turn from the cliff's edge. The wind feels different now, sharper, as if it's trying to push you away from the story. But you've already stepped too deep into it. And somewhere beneath the sea, or maybe under your skin, the gods are still watching. Not with eyes, but with tides, with fault lines, with memory. Atlantis didn't vanish because it was cursed. It vanished because it challenged the balance. And the balance always wins. You're standing in the middle of nothing, and yet it feels like everything. No waves, no forests, no ruins, just an endless, sun-bleached silence that stretches so far you forget where you are, or if you ever existed at all. The Sahara Desert, not the kind from movies. No camels, no date palms, no charming oases. This is the real Sahara. Brutal, timeless. A wind-scoured sea of stone and sand where even the sun feels like it's watching you, not warming you. And there, like a forgotten iris staring back at the sky, lies something impossible. The Rikhat structure. Locals call it Gelber Rikhat, but the world knows it by another name. The Eye of the Sahara. It's massive, so large it can only truly be seen from space. A series of concentric rings, 25 miles across, like a fingerprint pressed into the earth by a hand far too big to be human. And from above, it doesn't look geological. It looks designed. 3 main rings, evenly spaced. Circular. Symmetrical. Like a bullseye for gods. Like a map carved into the bones of the world. And here's the part that makes your breath catch. Plato described Atlantis as having 3 concentric rings of land and 2 of water, perfectly laid out, like ripples from stone dropped into still sea. He wrote, "There were 2 rings of land and 3 of water, equidistant, perfectly circular, constructed by Poseidon himself." Now close your eyes. Picture that. Then open them and look at a satellite image of the Eye of the Sahara. And tell me, are you seeing coincidence? Or are you seeing memory? Geologists, of course, will tell you it's natural. A collapsed dome, exposed through millennia of erosion. Sedimentary layers, shaped by wind, heat, and time. But geology doesn't explain the details. Like how the center contains evidence of ancient human settlement. Stone tools, carvings, even signs of agriculture. Although today it's drier than a sun-bleached bone. How did people live here? Why would they live here? Because once, long ago, this wasn't a desert. Thousands of years before the Sahara turned to sand, it was green. Forest lakes, rainfall, a place where giraffes roamed and rivers hummed. A place where civilization could thrive. Some call it the African humid period. Others call it the time before forgetting. And if you look closely, if you listen, you can feel it. That something lived here. Something big. Some researchers suggest the Eye of the Sahara is too symmetrical to be entirely natural. Too aligned. Too circular. Some even claim the elevation of the inner rings matches Plato's measurements almost perfectly if you convert from Greek stadia to modern meters. Is that science? Or is that desperation? It's hard to say, but here's what we do know. The eye matches Plato's geography exactly. West of Egypt, south of the Strait of Gibraltar. It was once surrounded by water. Ancient riverbeds snake around it like veins. Artifacts have been found here that suggest trade, metallurgy, culture. And yet, no excavation, no headlines, no mainstream exploration. Just silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but guarded. Why? Maybe because if you dig too deep here, you stop finding what, and start finding why. Why do we forget this? Why do we let the myth become a metaphor instead of a memory? You walk along the outer ring now. The wind has teeth. The rocks are warm, humming with heat pulled straight from the sun's throat. You place your hand on the stone. and for a moment, you feel a pulse. Not yours, hers, the eye. She's watching, not with judgment, not with malice, just waiting, because some stories don't want to be told. They want to be found. They want to be earned. And if this truly is Atlantis, then perhaps it didn't sink into the sea. Perhaps it sank into our blind spot, covered not by water, but by doubt. You lie down now, just at the edge of the outer ring. The sky above is too wide to hold. The earth below, too old to forget. You close your eyes, and somewhere between the sand and stars, you dream of a city carved in rings. A city that once lit fires high enough to be seen from the heavens. A city that saw the gods and fell between their teeth. Atlantis. We say the name like it stood alone, like it was the only shining light in a world of shadows. The lone jewel, the singular myth. But no kingdom exists in isolation. No empire rises without rivals, without neighbors, without stories whispered in other tongues under different stars. And if Atlantis ever lived, it wasn't alone. You open your eyes now beneath a different sky. It's not Greece, not Egypt, not even the familiar coastlines of the Mediterranean. You're standing in the Gulf of Kumbat, off the western coast of India. The water here is brown, silt-choked, trembling with current. But beneath the waves, hidden for thousands of years, lies something that shouldn't be there. A city, discovered by sonar in 2001. This submerged site stretches for miles. Rectilinear patterns, stone structures aligned with cardinal directions, pottery shards carbon dated to 9,500 years ago. That's not a typo. That's 7,000 BC, the same period Plato gave for the fall of Atlantis. And the locals? They're not surprised. Their stories already told this tale. In Indian mythology, there is a city called Dvarka, said to have been founded by the god Krishna himself. A sacred city built on the coast, shining with gold and jewels, filled with music and learning. And one day, as Krishna left the world, the sea took it back. They say it sank in a single day. They say no trace was ever found. Until now. But this is just one echo. Further west, in Mali, the Dogon people speak of beings from the stars. Namo, they call them, who came from the sky, descended into water, and taught humanity science, agriculture, and the stars. The Dogon possess intricate knowledge of the Sirius star system, including celestial bodies that can't be seen without modern telescopes. How? They say they remember. Not learned, remembered. In South America, the legends speak of a great flood, not just among the Inca, but deep into Amazonian oral traditions. They speak of gods who came before, builders, not destroyers. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs tell of 5 suns, 5 epochs of human history, each destroyed in cataclysm, each remembered in stone and sacrifice. Flood, fire, wind, earth, each one ending and something else taking its place. In Aboriginal Australia, stories thousands of years old describe rising sea levels, sunken coastlines, lost lands. And these aren't just myths. They've been matched to real geological changes during the last glacial maximum. So what does this mean? It means Atlantis isn't a solo act. It's part of a global pattern. Not one city, but many. Not one myth, but a network of memories. Maybe these weren't separate civilizations. Maybe they were pieces of something bigger. A culture stretched across continents. Not by conquest, but by connection. Trade, knowledge, shared architecture, shared symbols, shared fate. Because the flood myths don't come from one place. They come from everywhere. And they all say the same thing. We were great once. And then we fell. You stand now in a vast hall, not built of stone, but of story. Each wall inscribed in a different language. Each pillar carved in a different style. but all telling the same story with different names. It's not that Atlantis had neighbors. It's that Atlantis was the neighbor, the common thread, the whispered memory that binds the flood myths, the submerged cities, the lost temples from India to Bolivia. You begin to see the world differently now, not as separate civilizations, but as siblings, each one carrying a piece of the truth, each one remembering a little more than the last, each one singing the same funeral hymn in a different key. We've been taught to separate myth from history, to dismiss what doesn't fit neatly into the linear timeline we've constructed. But what if myth is how history survives? Not through numbers, but through story, through dreams, through places that remember long after people forget. Atlantis didn't stand alone. She had neighbors, friends, allies, rivals, and they too were lost. To the flood, to the sky, to our inability to remember without writing it down. But the earth remembers, the sea remembers, and if you're quiet long enough, you'll too. You come far, across maps and myths, ruins and whispers. You've walked deserts, touched ancient ink, and now you return to the sea, because this story always leads back here, to water, to the blue veil drawn over truth, to the deepest memory of the planet, still moving in waves, still hiding things it hasn't quite buried. But tonight, something's different, because now you're not standing at the edge. You're beneath it, submerged, drifting, not drowning, listening. The water presses gently around you, not like an enemy, but like a keeper of secrets. And you realize the sea doesn't forget everything. Some things she meant to hide, and some things she accidentally left behind. Take a deep breath. Not literal. You won't need lungs where we're going. You need attention. We're swimming now off the coast of Cuba, in the deep blue of the Yucatan Channel. In the early 2000s, a sonar team scanning for oil deposits pings something strange. Not rocks, not reefs, but structures. Massive geometric structures, rectangles, intersections, smooth contours arranged in rows. A city, or the ghost of one, over 2,000 feet below the surface. Too deep to be a recent casualty of erosion or rising tides. Too structured to be in natural formation. The lead researcher described the formations as pyramidal. Walls, roads, platforms, covered in coral, wrapped in darkness, but still there. And here's the problem. That deep, that old, this would mean the city, if it was a city, predates every known civilization. By thousands of years, it would belong to a time when sea levels were dramatically lower during the last ice age. And who was building pyramids back then? According to our textbooks, no one. According to the sea, someone. But don't stop swimming now. We're moving east to Japan, to Yonaguni. Here, in the Ryukyu archipelago, divers discovered a megalithic site beneath the waves. Sharp 90-degree angles. Terraces. Steps carved with precision. Massive, upright stones with smooth faces and flat surfaces. They call it the Yonaguni Monument. Geologists argue. Some say it's natural. Others, like marine archaeologist Dr. Masaaki Kimura, insist it's man-made. A sunken city, lost to rising seas over 10,000 years ago. The debate never resolves, but the site remains. Silent, present, too symmetrical for erosion, too deliberate for chance. The sea, it seems, forgot to erase completely. Or maybe it didn't forget. Maybe it wants us to find it, now that we're finally listening. And there's more. In the Bahamas, there's the mysterious Bimini Road. Underwater stones laid out like a broken highway just off the island's shore. Locals always told stories of a great city swallowed by the sea, of temples beneath the tide, of people who vanished but never died. You dive down, and the stones greet you. Massive, flat, some rectangular, some curved, some joined like puzzle pieces. Erosion? Sure, but when erosion builds roads, you start to ask different questions. You see, the sea is clever. It wears everything down, sharp edges, hard memories. But it can't grind intent into nothing. Because there's a difference between random formation and alignment, between chaos and design. These underwater sites weren't discovered by myth hunters. They were found by accident, by scientists, divers, engineers, people expecting oil or fish or sand. Instead, they found architecture. And what do we do with that? We call it coincidence. We argue about erosion. We dismiss. Because if we believe it's real, if we believe someone built cities before the sea swallowed them, then we also have to believe history isn't what we thought it was. We have to admit we've forgotten more than we've remembered. And that's terrifying, but not for you. Because here, beneath the waves, you don't feel fear. You feel recognition. This isn't the unknown. It's the deep memory of a world that once thrived, then fell, then waited. And the sea? She forgot nothing. She just keeps her secrets quiet until someone swims low enough and listens. You begin to rise now, gently, slowly. The surface is coming into view, a soft shimmer like a dream remembered halfway. But as you drift upward, you glance back, and there, through the dim blue haze, you see it. A stone platform, a staircase, a corner of a lost world, too stubborn to vanish. What the sea tried to hide, she also chose to keep. Not for everyone, just for those who were ready. And tonight, that's you. You thought there was only one, only Pyrie Reese, that lone Ottoman admiral, hunched in flickering lamplight, drawing the impossible from the depths of memory. But that was just the beginning. The truth is, the Pyrie Reese map was never a solitary miracle. It was part of a pattern, a quiet chain of cartographic heresies that stretch across continents, languages, and centuries. Maps that show what should have been unknown, what should have been invisible. Maps that weren't made to impress kings or chart conquests, but to preserve something older than nations, a memory of the world before it changed. You're standing now in a library, not a modern one, no fluorescent lights, no barcodes. This one smells of wax and wool, vellum and soot. The shelves are high, the air is thick. Every book here is heavy, not just in weight, but in truth. You reach for one. Orontius Phineas, 1531. A map of Antarctica, again, but like Pyrie's without ice. It shows rivers, mountain ranges, bays free of glaciers. Topography far too accurate for the time. Centuries before the continent was officially discovered. And just like that, another echo. Another voice in the dark, whispering that someone, long before, had already seen. Now another map. Philippe Boitch, 1737. He goes further. He splits Antarctica into two distinct land masses, separated by a vast channel. At the time, it sounds absurd. But in 1950s, seismic surveys under the ice confirm. Boitch was right, and no one knows how. Unless Boitch, like Pyrie, had access to older sources. To fragments. To whispers passed down from people who never should have known, but did. Let's keep going. Gerardus Mercator, 1569. The man whose name adorns the modern map projection we all know. But there's something else about Mercator, something hidden in his letters. He wrote about very ancient maps preserved by monks, brought to Europe by Phoenician sailors, and passed on through generations of scholars who didn't fully understand what they held. In one letter, he describes a lost northern land, a polar continent, split into four parts by rivers surrounding a magnetic mountain. He called it Hyperborea. Another myth? Or another memory? Here's the unsettling part. These weren't isolated eccentrics. They were the most respected map makers of their time. Their maps were used by kings, explorers, navigators. They shaped empires. And yet, they drew impossibilities. How? Where do they get their data? Because before satellites, before aerial photography, before even basic longitude, you could not map a continent you hadn't physically seen. And yet, they did. Here's one more for you. The Dulcer portal on 1339. A nautical chart that shows the Canary Islands perfectly aligned, with a precision modern GPS barely improves on. And in the margins, notes referencing lands now lost to the sea. Even older are the Zeno maps from 1380, describing lands in the North Atlantic that no longer appear above water. Some historians scoff. They call them fabrications, errors, misinterpretations. But if that's true, why do the mistakes keep being right? Why do these errors so often match what sonar and satellite imaging would only confirm centuries later? Either the old map makers were lucky beyond belief, or they weren't guessing at all. They were copying, translating fragments of atlases far older than Europe itself. Atlases rescued from burning cities, from shipwrecks, from the ashes of Alexandria. Atlases that perhaps were never meant for our era, because they came from another, a forgotten one, a pre-flood world where coastlines were different, where seas were lower, where knowledge was not invented, but inherited. And maybe that's the most haunting idea of all, that we're not the peak of human history. We're the aftermath, the ones who came after the wave, after the fall, after the ink had already faded. The Pyrie Reese map was not a miracle. It was a survivor, one of many. Proof not that we're progressing steadily forward, but that we're circling back, repeating, forgetting, rediscovering what we used to know. You close the book now. The library hums around you, not with voices, but with memory. Dozens, maybe hundreds of other maps remain, tucked in old monasteries, hidden in private collections, discredited by scholars who never really looked. And all of them whisper the same thing. You weren't the first, and you won't be the last. But we left you a trail, if you're willing to see. And you are, because you know now, the map wasn't alone, and neither are you. By now, you've seen the lines, the maps, the ruins, the silent structures beneath waves. You've touched the salt-worn truth in the bones of forgotten cities. You've begun to suspect that Atlantis was real. But what if that's the least important part? What if its reality, its geography, its location, its architecture wasn't the point? What if it was never meant to be a destination, but a mirror? What if the reason Atlantis keeps calling to us through stories, through sonar, through coincidence, is not because it wants to be found, but because it wants to be understood? You're not holding a treasure map. You're holding a warning label, and not the polite kind. The kind that comes after multiple lawsuits and a few preventable deaths. Caution, this is what happens when you forget what you are. Because Atlantis didn't fall because of weakness. It fell because of excess, of abundance taken for granted, of brilliance untethered by humility. You remember what Plato said? The Atlanteans weren't crushed by external enemies. They weren't conquered. They collapsed under their own weight. They were builders, masters of science, agriculture, engineering. A people so in tune with the elements, they could channel water through concentric canals, draw gold from the ground, align temples with stars. And for a while, they lived in harmony. Until they didn't. Until the divine portion in them began to fade, and the human began to grow. Until innovation turned to domination. Until wealth became arrogance. Until they stopped asking why, and only asked how much. It wasn't an apocalypse. It was a slow rot. The kind of collapse you only see when you look back. The kind you live through and call progress. And doesn't that sound familiar? Tell me, honestly, When you hear the story of Atlantis, do you think of a lost world? Or do you feel something colder? A recognition, because maybe you've seen the signs. Cities glowing at night with more light than stars. Skyscrapers rising like middle fingers to the past. Oceans choking on plastic. Forests turned to numbers on a spreadsheet. Empires that speak of peace while manufacturing war. We are not unlike them. Brilliant, restless, hungry, and like them, we build too fast, consume too much, forget too easily. Atlantis isn't a bedtime story. It's a cautionary tale, so old we've started calling it a myth just to make ourselves feel better. Because if it really happened, if an advanced civilization really collapsed under its own hubris, then that means it can happen again. Not from magic, not from wrath, but from simple, compounding choices. From choosing comfort over awareness, speed over wisdom, control over connection. And just like that, the sea comes. Not because it hates us, because we ignored the warnings. Because the balance always reclaims what gets too heavy. You're lying awake now, aren't you? Not because you're afraid, but because the pattern is clear. Atlantis wasn't destroyed by gods. It was destroyed by its own greatness, untethered by humility. And that's the real warning. You may become everything you dreamed and still lose everything you need. That's what Atlantis is. Not myth. A memory we wrapped in fiction because the truth hurt too much. A story we keep telling because we suspect we're repeating it. And maybe that's why you can't stop thinking about it. Why the ruins echo. Why the name lingers on your tongue like salt. Why maps, pyramids, and stones keep showing us what we refuse to learn from. Because Atlantis isn't trying to be found. It's trying to be heard. It's standing in your future, waving a red flag from the past. Don't build too high. Don't forget what you are, or we'll see each other again at the bottom of the sea. You think you've heard everything. You've followed the trail of maps and monuments, legends and losses. You've stood in deserts, walked beneath oceans, listened to the warnings scratched into the corners of history. But now you arrive at the quietest evidence of all, the one no one likes to talk about. Bones. Because when the waters rise, when cities fall, when civilizations vanish, the body stays. For a while. You're kneeling now in the mud of a coastal shelf. The tide is out, the wind still, a gray sky overhead, stretched like worn parchment, offering no answers. And then your hand brushes something. It's not a stone. It's smooth, curved, ancient. A jawbone, human, cracked by pressure, stained by silt, still holding a single tooth. You didn't discover it. You just disturbed it. Because bones don't want to be found. They just want to be left alone. But we never let them be, do we? We dig. We scan. We build. And every now and then, the earth gives one up just to remind us. You are not the first. You are not as permanent as you think. Around the world, in the least expected places, bones are surfacing. In submerged forests off the coasts of Wales and Doggerland. The now sunken landmass that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. They find human remains among the roots of ancient oaks, still standing upright beneath the waves. Stone tools, campfires, fossilized footprints in clay that once was shoreline. A child, a woman, a man, all swept away by a sea that moved too slowly to notice until it was too late. Off the coast of Florida, they find the Windover Bog people. Dozens of bodies preserved in peat for over 7,000 years. Skulls intact, brain tissue soft and gray like old soap, still sitting in the cradle of bone. Some are buried with tools, others with children. They didn't live in caves. They didn't grunt or crawl. They sang. They mourned. They carried their dead, and then they were drowned. Further south, in the Caribbean, divers find bones buried beneath layers of shell and coral. in places that should never have supported human life, let alone human death. No architecture survives, only the curve of a rib, the cupped hands of a pelvis, bones scattered, stained, sleeping. In India, near the Gulf of Kumbat, artifacts brought up from deep silt layers are accompanied by fragments of skulls, jawbones, vertebrae. Carbon dating places them before recorded history. And just like that, history blinks. The question is no longer, did Atlantis exist? But how many Atlanteans have we already walked past? Because bones don't lie. They don't exaggerate. They don't need stories or myths or temples. They just wait. They remember in silence. They endure in the one language no one argues with. The human form reduced to its simplest truth. It's not just that people lived in these now-drowned places. It's that they died there. Not in battle, not in ceremony, but in confusion, in desperation. Because when the flood came, it didn't knock. It whispered. It rose inch by inch, day by day. And by the time they noticed, it was already inside the door. Imagine a mother clutching a child, a father running toward a hill, a young man standing still, staring at the horizon, daring the water to reach him. It did, and it remembered. Long after their names vanished, their bones remain, tucked in underwater cliffs, pressed between strata, folded into the earth like quiet footnotes in a story we still pretend to understand. And now here you are, kneeling beside them. You brush the mud from an ancient femur and feel something strange in your own bones. A kind of resonance, a trembling, because these aren't just the bones of forgotten people. They're warnings etched in calcium, markers left behind not to be mourned, but to be understood. They don't want pity. They want us to see that it already happened, that the flood came. That brilliance isn't immunity. That time doesn't care how many libraries you build if you don't learn to listen. Atlantis is not just ruins. It's a mass grave, and the bones beneath the flood, they're not lost. They're just waiting for someone to believe them. And tonight, that someone is you. By now, you've walked through mud, stared down broken temples, held the bones of drowned ancestors in your hands. You've begun to understand that Atlantis was never a single city, but a memory scattered across the world like ash after a fire. And now you ask the question you've been afraid to voice. Who built it? Because these were not simple people. They mapped stars with no telescopes. They carved blocks so large, modern cranes would crack beneath their weight. They moved stone across miles of jungle, desert, and floodplain without wheels, without draft animals, without explanation. They left behind no books, just precision, patterns, symbols repeated from South America to Egypt to Mesopotamia, before those places were ever supposed to speak the same language. So the ancients, trying to make sense of this forgotten world, did what we always do when we're in over our heads. They turned their memories into myths, and their engineers into gods. You walk now into a chamber. You're not sure where it is. It's underground, humid, lit by torchlight, or maybe by memory. The walls are covered in frescoes. Men with strange eyes. Women wearing headgear shaped like the moon. Tall figures with elongated skulls, holding devices that look nothing like spears. They're not fighting. They're teaching. Below them, ordinary people, children, hands outstretched like students receiving knowledge, not punishment. This is not a story of conquest. It's a story of inheritance. In Egypt, they called him Thoth, god of wisdom, writing mathematics. He came from the west, they said, from the island of flame. He carried no sword, only a staff of light and a tongue of logic. He gave him law, language, measure. He wasn't born of a goddess. He was remembered. In Mesoamerica, they called him Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. He too came from the sea, pale-skinned, bearded, not demanding worship but giving tools. He taught the calendar, He taught how to plant corn with the rhythms of the stars. And when his work was done, he promised to return. Sound familiar? The Dogon of Mali speak of Namo, a being who arrived in a vessel that spun like a seed. He emerged from water. He knew the secrets of the stars. He didn't just visit, he built. Taught. He bled, too, offering parts of himself for the growth of mankind. In India, there's Vishwakarma, the divine architect. Not a warrior, but a builder. His temples echo the same impossible stonework seen across oceans. Smooth, interlocking joints resistant to earthquakes and time. Are these all just coincidences? Are we to believe that all ancient people in every corner of the globe invented the same kind of gods? Bearded men from across the sea, teachers with strange devices, builders of cities that would one day sink beneath the water? Or is this the same story told again and again by those who survived and tried to explain who came before? Because if the gods were teachers, and if their temples were libraries, then Atlantis wasn't just a place. It was a faculty, a world where knowledge flowed not down from heavens, but across oceans. And here's the part that makes you shift in your seat. These gods, they weren't immortal. In some stories, they get sick. In others, they die. In a few, they bleed. Quetzalcoatl throws himself in a fire to become the sun. Namo is dismembered and resurrected. Thoth is sometimes replaced, sometimes reborn. These are not the untouched gods of Olympus. These are beings who suffer, which means they were not gods. They were people, extraordinary, advanced, unthinkably old, but human still. And what happens when their world collapses? They scatter, they sail, they settle in less broken places, trying to preserve what they can before the waves come again. And those who remember them, those who inherit their stone tools and star maps, call them gods not out of worship, but out of grief, because to remember someone as a god is to keep them alive forever, even when their bones are gone, even when their city sleeps beneath the waves, even when their map has faded into myth. You press your hand to the fresco. The painted eyes stare back at you, not divine, not monstrous, just tired, like someone who tried to save something and failed. Maybe they built Atlantis. Maybe they were Atlantis. Maybe they were you once before the forgetting. And maybe they're still here, not in temples, not in ruins, but in the stories you can't stop telling, and the questions you can't stop asking. Late at night, when the world is quiet, and your bones remember what your books do not. You return to Giza, but everything feels different now. The tourists are gone. The cameras, the buses, the postcard stalls. It's just you now, standing before that impossible silhouette on the edge of the sand. The Great Sphinx, tall as a 6-story building, longer than a city block, older than memory. It stares east, unblinking, as it has for thousands of years, into the rising sun, into the future, into us. And yet, we don't look back. Not really. We take our selfies. We marvel at its size. We guess at its missing nose. But we never ask the real question, the one that burns through centuries like the desert wind. What's under it? Because for over a century, whispers have circled through halls of academia and esoteric circles alike. There's a library beneath the Sphinx, a hidden chamber, a vault of stone, older than dynasties, older than language. They call it the Hall of Records. You've heard the legends, maybe from fringe documentaries, maybe from books hidden on the back shelf, maybe in the kinds of conversations that start after midnight and end in goosebumps. But the story keeps coming back. That buried beneath the Sphinx is a room sealed with ancient technology. Not magic, not fantasy, just the kind of knowing that we've long since lost. And inside that room, the memory of Atlantis. Not metaphor, not myth. Records. Scrolls, tablets, maps, writings etched in a pre-dynastic hand. Accounts of a world that once was, and a flood that made sure it would never be again. Here's what makes it harder to dismiss. In 1993, seismic testing was performed around the Sphinx by geologist Dr. Thomas DeBecke and researcher John Anthony West. And what do they find? Anomalies. A cavity beneath the Sphinx's front paws. Rectangular, artificial, empty of natural explanation. The Egyptian authorities denied excavation. Still do. No one has gone in. No one has seen it. Or if they have, they're not speaking. But the whispers only grow louder. In 1930, famed clairvoyant Edgar Cayce, often called the Sleeping Prophet, predicted that a hidden chamber would be discovered beneath the Sphinx in the late 20th century. He said it would contain records of Atlantis, and that it would be found when humanity was ready. Is that now? Maybe. Or maybe we're still afraid of what we might find. Because if such a chamber exists, it would rewrite everything. Not just history books, not just timelines, but us. It would mean we are not the first. It would mean civilization is cyclical, not linear. That progress rises and falls like tide, like flood, like memory. That we are not the pinnacle. We're the rebuilding. And the Sphinx? Maybe it's not a statue at all. Maybe it's a guardian. Maybe its missing nose isn't vandalism, but an exhale, a sigh from a sentinel who's watched us ignore the truth for millennia. You stand at its feet now. Feel the heat in the stone, the pressure in the air, like the silence is holding its breath. You press your ear to the ground, and just for a second, you think you hear it. A rustle, a shuffle, like paper turning in the dark. Not myth, not metaphor, just waiting. Because that's what memory does. It waits, in vaults, in ruins, in hearts, in rooms sealed not by locks, but by fear. And what's beneath the Sphinx? Maybe it's just sand, but maybe, just maybe, it's the last true memory of a world we've chosen to forget. A world that built, soared, collapsed, and left us everything we needed to remember it, except the courage to look. You turn away from the Sphinx. It does not move. It does not follow, but you feel it watching, not judging, just waiting. And maybe one day, when we're ready, we'll dig. And beneath the paws of a lion too old for dynasties, we'll find our own reflection. You arrive at dusk. There is no sign, no neon, no gates, just a stone platform in Baalbek, Lebanon, perched like an accident too massive to be ignored. But this is no accident. This is memory in monolith. Baalbek is old, unspeakably old. So old, in fact, that no one can agree who built it. The Romans? Sure, they came here, built temples to Jupiter, Venus, Bacchus. But even their own records say this place was ancient when they arrived. And it's not the temples that make you tremble. It's the foundation. Because beneath the Roman ruins lies a platform of stones. Each 100s of tons, some over 1,000. Let's put that in perspective. One of the stones, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs an estimated 1,100 tons. That's the equivalent of 200 elephants. It's the largest single carved stone ever moved by human hands, or rather by someone's hands. Except no one knows how. Even today, with all our cranes and computers, we could not replicate it. The stones weren't just quarried. They were carved, transported uphill, and placed with such precision that not even a razor blade fits between them. And yet, they lie there. Not boastful, not explained, just present. Too heavy to erase, too silent to ignore. This is not the kind of work done for vanity. This was not made for war, or for palaces, or for gods in the image of kings. This was made for forever. And that's what unnerves you. Because the deeper you walk into the platform, through shadowed corridors and echoing chambers, the more you begin to feel it. This wasn't built by a people afraid of time. It was built by a people who understood it. People who dreamed in stone, who believed the world could shift, could drown, could burn, and yet this foundation would remain. And so far, they were right. Baalbek remains, not in textbooks, not in tourist brochures, but in silence. That heavy, humming kind of silence that wraps around you like an unfinished thought. What if these stones were never meant to be part of a city? What if they were anchors, stabilizers holding something down? Or worse, holding something in? There are theories, always theories. Some say this was a landing pad. For what they don't say. Others say it was a pre-Diluvian power center, drawing energy from telluric currents in the earth. Some even claim it was a resonance chamber, tuned to frequencies that no longer exist. But maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe these stones are just the last thing a people built before the world shifted under their feet. Maybe this was their Atlantis. And maybe when the sea came for them, or the earth cracked, or the sky turned black, they didn't build an ark. They built this, not to escape, but to be remembered. Because a book can burn, a city can drown, but basalt holds grief like no other material. It doesn't weep. It doesn't forget. It just waits. And tonight, as you sit on the edge of the platform, your hand pressed to a stone too old for any story you've heard, you feel something stir. A low hum. No, not sound. Memory. Somewhere beneath this stone is the echo of a people who knew things we don't, who walked with the sun in one hand and geometry in the other, who measured time not in years, but in cataclysms. And they left behind no memoirs. Just mass. Just weight. Because weight is honest. It cannot be faked. It cannot be debated. It just is. And if 1,000-ton stone says something used to exist here, you listen. You run your fingers along the edge. Sharp in places, soft in others, smoothed by wind and time and disbelief. This is not a monument. This is evidence of dreams carved not in parchment or prayer, but in basalt, in stones so dense, even forgetting cannot crush it. You rise to your feet. And for a moment, just a moment, you swear the platform exhales beneath you. A deep volcanic breath, like something ancient dreaming under stone. Still alive, still waiting, still speaking in a language made only of silence and weight. And you are one of the few who has heard it. It begins with a creak, not a thunderclap, not an avalanche, just a creak like old wood bending in a forgotten attic. But you're not in an attic. You're standing on the edge of a glacier. White and blue stretch out endlessly before you, stitched with veins of shadow and time. The air is sharp, thin, and impossibly quiet. It's the kind of silence that doesn't feel natural, the kind that feels deliberate, as if the ice itself is listening. And maybe it is. Because if the sea remembers through salt and bone, and the desert remembers through stone and ruin, then the ice remembers everything, perfectly, unforgivingly. Inside this glacier, miles deep, are bubbles of ancient air, pollen from extinct flowers, spores from forests that drowned millennia ago, and sometimes something more. In 1991, 2 hikers stumbled upon what they thought was a discarded coat in the Alps. It wasn't. It was Otzi, a man frozen in ice for over 5,000 years. Still wearing shoes. Still carrying a copper axe. Still bearing the tattoos inked into his flesh with charcoal and ash. His last meal was venison and unleavened bread. His final steps mapped by blood. And the arrow in his back told a story no one expected. Not a traveler. A hunted man. A hunted memory. He wasn't alone. Across Siberia and Greenland, bodies emerge, mummified by frost, perfectly preserved. Some are warriors. Some are children. Some are strangers. genetically anomalous, anatomically unusual. Their tools don't match the local culture. Their skulls stretch in odd directions. Their clothing woven from fibers that shouldn't have existed yet. And when they thaw, the questions return. Who were they? Where did they come from? What were they running from? Because here's the thing about ice. It doesn't just preserve. It traps. Ideas. Artifacts. Entire histories sealed under layers of snow, untouched by time, untarnished by narrative. And when climate shifts, when melt begins, the past starts leaking out. Not in museum exhibitions, in floods, in viruses, in fragments. They found tools older than agriculture, fossils of forests under Antarctica, pathogens trapped in permafrost, still viable, still dangerous. The ice is not just a time capsule. It's a vault, and it's opening. You stare into a crevasse. It is not black. It is deep blue, almost glowing, like the iris of a giant eye watching from the bottom of the world. And as the wind rushes past, you hear it again. A whisper, not language, not voice, but intention, like something old is calling out, not in panic, but in remembrance, calling to be seen. Because long before we carved stone or forged bronze, long before we measured time in years instead of floods, humans walked under colder skies. And maybe, just maybe, they left something behind. Not because they failed to survive, but because they chose to hide, to preserve a truth that would be too heavy for the warm world to bear. A truth that only the eyes could hold. And what if that truth is Atlantis? Not the city, but the memory of its fall. Hidden not in books, but in frost. Buried not in myth, but in marrow. Carried not in legend, but in the blood of those who fled north when the waters came. They say the last survivors of Atlantis sailed in every direction. Some went south, some east, but the most desperate, they fled to the ends of the earth, to the mountains, to the ice, to sleep. And maybe they're still there, not alive, but remembered, in the ancient DNA that doesn't match the story we've written, in the snowflakes that drift down tonight. Each one shaped by breath exhaled 10,000 years ago. You close your eyes. You can hear the creak again, not of ice breaking, but of truth awakening. It's not a sound meant to alarm. It's a reminder that nothing is truly lost, that even the coldest places carry warmth, that even in ice, Atlantis remembers. You've noticed it, haven't you? The gaps. Not just in textbooks or timelines, but in everything. The stories that start strong and then stutter. But we're not sure what happened next. The monuments whose origins are uncertain. Probably ceremonial. The languages no one can decode. The maps that don't match the land. The bones that don't match the people. At some point, you stop believing this was just coincidence. You began to suspect it's something else. A design. A system of forgetting built not by accident, but by architects. Not men with chisels or machines, but a quieter kind of builder. One who works in erasures, not carvings. Who doesn't shout, "Here is the truth." But rather, you didn't see that. Let me show you their work. Start with the Library of Alexandria. We're told it burned. A tragedy, an accident. But what they don't tell you is how many times it burned. Once by Julius Caesar, then again under the Christian Emperor Theodosius. Then, they say, by Caliph Omar. 3 fires, 3 opportunities to erase the greatest repository of ancient knowledge ever assembled. Gone were texts on lost continents. Gone were star maps thousands of years older than Rome. Gone were the names of those who came before. That's how forgetting works. Not in fire alone, but in repetition, in layered denial, in the phrase, "there's no evidence." After the evidence has been destroyed, then there's Plato. You remember what he said about Atlantis. That it was real, Then it fell. But did you know his own students stopped quoting that part? As if embarrassed by it, as if instructed to move on. For centuries, academics dismissed it as allegory, not because of proof, but because the idea was inconvenient. That's the mark of a masterful forgetting. When you make the truth so uncomfortable, people start forgetting it voluntarily. But the architects didn't stop with books. They moved into maps. Look at the old globes. Before Antarctica was discovered, there are land masses drawn exactly where it is now, labeled Terra Australis Incognita. How? Before satellite imaging? Before global navigation? Some say they guessed, but too many of those guesses are correct, which is why so many of those maps have been revised, or lost, or filed in archives no one's allowed to touch. And if you ask about them, the answer is always the same. There's no consensus. There's no evidence. It's not real. But you've heard that before, haven't you? In every civilization, there's a moment, right before the forgetting, where knowledge becomes dangerous, where those in power realize the truth is too powerful to share, and so they don't burn it. Not always. That would be obvious. Instead, they bury it. They replace it. They rebrand it. The gods become myths. The facts become fairy tales. The teachers become fictions. Atlantis becomes a bedtime story. And we sleep, generation after generation, lulled by that same lullaby. It was just a story. Don't ask too many questions. Move on. But you didn't move on. You're still here, wide awake. And the architects? It didn't plan for you. Because forgetting only works when everyone agrees to play along. And you stopped playing. You looked at the stones. You read the myths. You stood in the ruins. You pressed your ear to the ice and listened. And now you know, Atlantis didn't vanish. It was hidden. And those who buried it, they didn't win. Because for all their precision, they forgot one thing. They forgot how curious we are. They forgot how dreams resurface in silence. How memory seeps through cracks in the timeline. How truth returns again and again. Whispered in myths, carved in rock, frozen in blood. They built walls around forgetting. But walls crumble. And tonight, in the quiet glow of this story, one stone just fell, and through the gap, you glimpse something blinding. Not the end of Atlantis, but its echo, still ringing, still reaching. And you're no longer just listening. You're remembering. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? An island, not sinking, not shattering, but slipping away. Not destroyed, but relocated. And yet, that's exactly what some of the oldest stories suggest. That Atlantis wasn't lost to catastrophe, but pulled deliberately out of reach. Moved like a chess piece across the board of history, until no one knew where to find it anymore. Let's go back, not to Plato this time, but further, to the stories beneath the stories. In the mythologies of the Polynesians, there's talk of a vanishing island. They call it Hawaii, the ancestral homeland, said to have once been visible on the horizon, but slowly, mysteriously, it drifted away. In West Africa, the Dogon people speak of an origin place called Potolo, a star world, an island of knowledge, whose people journeyed to Earth and then returned or perhaps relocated elsewhere. The Aztecs, too, have a myth, Aztlan, the gleaming white island from which their ancestors came, a land that once sat at the center of a lake, but disappeared when the gods deemed the world unworthy of its secrets. All myths, or different languages describing the same event? Here's where it gets stranger. Satellite images of the ocean floor show something odd. Between the coast of West Africa and the Caribbean, there's a long ridge under the Atlantic called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. a jagged, scarred fault line stretching like a spine beneath the sea. But what's peculiar isn't the ridge itself. It's what surrounds it. Flat-topped, underwater plateaus. Seamounts that rise like the ghosts of mountains. And shapes, massive, geometrical, that don't look natural. To geologists, they're anomalies. To others, they're the roots of something older. Something relocated. Because here's a theory. What if Atlantis was built on a tectonic boundary? Engineered not just to exist, but to move? Not with magic, not with fantasy, but with a kind of technology so old. We call it mythology simply because we don't have better words. Imagine a civilization so advanced it understood the Earth, not just as ground, but as a machine. They would have read the planet's crust like a blueprint, understood how plates shift, how energy flows, how gravity could be used like an oar. And when they saw the flood coming, not overnight, but over centuries, they didn't run. They sailed, not across the ocean, with it. This is what the legend in ancient Sumer calls Dilmun, the land that disappeared into the sea, only to rise again in another place. The Hopi talk of Palaquapi, the red city that traveled, a sacred sitter built in 3 different locations, each one left behind like a skin shed for survival. And in esoteric circles, there's the notion of mobile temples, structures designed not just to withstand time, but to reposition themselves when the world changed too much to hold them. Could Atlantis have been one of these? A place not fixed, but intended to vanish? Not to hide from destruction, but to evade discovery. Because maybe the Atlanteans didn't fear nature. Maybe they feared us. And maybe before they left, they set in motion a plan not of resurrection, but of reclusion. A retreat into places we can't easily reach. A shift beneath the sea, or under the ice, or inside the folds of space and memory where myths go to sleep. And now, here's the thought that won't leave you. What if Atlantis never sank? What if it still exists? Not beneath, but beside. A half step outside of our reality. An island moving just fast enough to stay out of sight, just slow enough to remain in story. We talk about time like it's linear. We draw maps like they are flat. But the ancients knew better. They spoke of worlds within worlds, currents that twist not only through water, but through time and perception. And if Atlantis knew how to move, not physically, but dimensionally, then it is not lost. It's simply elsewhere, close enough to whisper, too far to grasp. And sometimes, late at night, you feel it, that pull. That aching sense that something is just out of reach. Like a dream fading upon waking. Or a name you almost remember. That's Atlantis. Not a ruin. Not a myth. A memory that walks. And as long as it walks, we chase it. Because maybe we're not looking for a place. Maybe we're looking for the part of ourselves that we buried with it. And maybe, just maybe, it's looking for us too. Let's begin not at the surface, but far below. Deeper than the oceans. Deeper than ruins. Deeper even than memory. Close your eyes. You're falling. Not quickly, but steadily, like sinking through thick honey. Down through layers of earth. Past bones, past basalt, past fossilized forests and forgotten cities. Until finally, you feel it. Heat, not warmth. Not comfort. But the kind of primal fire that stares back. The kind that doesn't blink, doesn't forgive, and doesn't wait. You've reached the mantle, the molten bloodstream of the planet. A place of relentless movement. A churning hunger that reshapes continents with a yawn. This is where the flood began. Because long before Atlantis was swallowed by water, something else stirred far beneath her. And it wasn't just the ocean that rose. It was the earth itself. Let's go back. Plato wrote of a violent earthquake and flood, that consumed Atlantis in a single day and night. We tend to picture waves, tsunamis, but what if he was only half right? What if the destruction didn't fall from above, but rose from within? Across ancient cultures, you'll find it again and again. Fire of burning beneath the water. Fire an island cracked open by fire. Fire a world devoured not just by sea, but by eruption. In the Pacific, the Polynesians tell of a land of fire that disappeared with screams. In Hindu cosmology, the Satya Yuga ends in floods and flame, water above, lava below. Even the Norse spoke of Surt, the fire giant whose sword would split the world at the end of time, melting land and sky alike. But these are just stories, right? Until you look at Santorini, a Greek island once called Thera. Today it's a crescent moon of land. But once it was a perfect circle, until around 1600 BC when it exploded. A volcanic eruption so violent, it destroyed the heart of the island, drowned nearby coastlines, sent ash clouds across the earth, and triggered tsunamis over 100 feet high. Sound familiar? Many believe this was the disaster that inspired the Atlantis myth. But what if it wasn't just an inspiration? What if Thera was Atlantis? Or at least a colony, one of many high places built by the same forgotten people. A network stretched across the ancient world, all connected by trade, knowledge, and something deeper. Because you see, fire doesn't just destroy, it reveals. And when archaeologists dug through the ash of Thera, they didn't find scattered huts or tribal camps. They found multi-story buildings, frescoes of dolphins and advanced seafaring, indoor plumbing, engineering thousands of years ahead of its time. And then they found nothing. No bodies, no chaos, no signs of people caught unaware. As if somehow they knew, as if they saw the fire rising from below and left before it could take them. Just like Plato said, a violent earthquake and flood in a single day and night. But perhaps the earthquake wasn't the beginning. Perhaps it was the symptom. Because here's the theory whispered among those who've seen too much. That Atlantis wasn't destroyed by nature, but by energy. That beneath their cities, beneath their temples and altars and crystalline spires, lay something alive. A power source. Not nuclear, not magical, something older, tapped into the planet's own nervous system. Call it what you want. Telluric energy, geomagnetic current, the fire in the veins of the earth. Atlantis didn't fall because of hubris alone. It fell because it played with something it didn't fully understand. And when that energy surged, when the fire beneath grew too strong, it wasn't just a continent that cracked. It was memory, shattered, drowned, scorched from the stone, but not erased, because fire, like myth, always leaves traces. In the black glass that archaeologists call mystery vitrification, found in fortresses from Scotland to India, walls melted as if by heat hotter than any fire we know. In the lakes of volcanic glass in Egypt, where ancient tools made from Libyan desert glass lie, beside jewelry bearing symbols that shouldn't exist. In the ground beneath your feet, still warm in places, still humming. Tonight, you feel it too. The fire, not outside but within, a sense that something powerful once moved beneath us, and might again, because the earth doesn't forget. She remembers in magma. She sings lullabies in tectonic lull. And when she wakes, when she shifts, she tells stories not with words, but with flood and flame. And we're left to guess. Was Atlantis taken by the sea? Or did the earth open her jaws and swallow her own child? You wake up with a feeling again. That strange sense of belonging to a place you've never seen. A name you almost remember. A city that smells like salt and gold, and corridors lit by something that isn't fire, but glows like it loves you. Where does that come from? Some would say it's fantasy, but some would say it's inheritance. Not of wealth, not of culture, but of memory, because you carry within you a library far older than any scroll or stone. Your DNA, spiraling quietly inside every cell, every breath, is a living record of everything your ancestors touched, feared, learned, and survived. And sometimes when the wind is just right, when the night is just quiet enough, that record plays back. Let's start here. You are, biologically speaking, impossible. A mosaic of millions of genetic decisions. You're a part Neanderthal. You carry traces of Denisovans. Fragments from people we have no names for. The Human Genome Project was supposed to solve the riddle of who we are. But instead, it gave us more riddles. Because buried in your blood are sequences that don't match anything on Earth. They call them endogenous retroviruses, or junk DNA, which is just science's way of saying, we have no idea where this came from, but we're going to name it something that sounds like we do. But what if those fragments, those leftovers, aren't junk? What if they're messages? What if they are memories? You see, memory isn't just about the brain. It lives in the body. Trauma can pass through generations. Fears we don't understand, like drowning or open oceans, can show up in people who have never seen the sea. How? Because experience leaves marks. And if a civilization once drowned, if its survivors scattered, traumatized, hunted by fire and water and forgetting, wouldn't their bodies carry that pain? Wouldn't it find its way into the dreams of their children? There are tribes today who still speak of a lost motherland, though they've forgotten the name. There are people who dream of crystal halls, though they've never seen one. There are children who draw circles in threes, without knowing why. What if these are not coincidences? What if they are echoes? Genetic reverberations from a place we're told never existed. Because when researchers began studying ancient genomes, they found anomalies, clusters of unique markers, shared across populations too distant from one another to explain. People in the Andes who share markers with tribes in West Africa. Coastal Japanese with mitochondrial matches in ancient Peruvians. Denisovan DNA in islanders who've never left the Pacific. It doesn't add up. Unless you remember this, Atlantis was said to be a naval power, a seafaring empire, with colonies, with survivors. And if those survivors scattered to South America, to Egypt, to the highlands of Tibet, they would have left no monuments, but they would have left descendants. And those descendants are us. Not all of us, but enough. Enough to carry the code. Enough to whisper in dreams. Enough to remember what we were told to forget. Because here's the secret. They didn't just build with stone. They built with story. And they hid their story in the only place no one could erase. The bloodline. That's why Atlantis couldn't be fully destroyed. Because it didn't just exist outside. It existed within. In the angle of a jaw. In a fear of water. In a lullaby passed down with no known origin. Atlantis didn't fall. It seeded. And we, the poets, the wanderers, the ones who dream of ancient cities. When the night is heavy and the stars feel like windows, we are the proof. Not because we know, but because we feel. And if you've ever felt it, that hunger for a world more elegant than this one, that ache for a knowledge you can't quite remember, then you're not imagining it. You are remembering. You are awakening. You're answering the call written in your bones, coded into the soft spiral of your cells. Atlantis was never just a place. It was a frequency. And you, dear listener, you've always been tuned in. It rests quietly under glass. No fanfare, no dramatic lighting. Just a worn piece of parchment, ink fading, lines quivering like veins in an aging hand. You're standing in a museum in Istanbul, and before you lies the Pyre Reis map, drawn in 1513. signed by a Turkish admiral who claimed to compile it from older sources. Some ancient, some lost, some passed from one whispering hand to another. It shows Europe, Africa, the New World, and then it shows something else. Antarctica. But here's the problem. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and even then, it was assumed to be a frozen wasteland, its real shape obscured by endless snow and ice. Yet the Pyrie Reis map depicts it not only a full 3 centuries early, but in a way no modern eye had ever seen it. It shows Antarctica's coastline, not the icy shell we see today, but the landmass beneath the ice, a shape only confirmed in the 1950s, with seismic radar and subglacial scans. So how did a map made in the 1500s show that? You might be tempted to say coincidence or luck, but look closer, because this map is only the beginning. Other pre-modern charts, Orent's Fine S, the Zeno map, the Bwatch map, also show details they shouldn't. Mountains where mountains are, rivers where rivers run, under ice. Some maps even depict islands in the middle of the Atlantic. Islands that do not exist now, but once perhaps did. Were these just errors? Or were they memories, transcriptions of older knowledge, fragments of a cartographic inheritance passed down through empires, through floods, through fire? This brings us back to Pyrie Reis. He was no fool, a decorated admiral, a scholar. He annotated his map with care, scribbled in Ottoman script are phrases like, "This part is drawn from the map of Columbus. These coasts were drawn from maps dating from the time of Alexander the Great." Some say these charts come from the days of the flood. Think about that. He wasn't claiming genius. He was confessing a lineage, one that passed through hands we no longer recognize, one that led, inevitably, back to Atlantis. Because only a civilization that mapped the world long before it was rediscovered could leave such cartographic breadcrumbs. And only a people who feared erasure would encode their knowledge into something so humble, so durable, as a map. Why a map? Because it doesn't preach. It doesn't command. It simply shows. And if you don't know what you're looking at, it's just lines. But if you do, it's a code. And perhaps the real treasure isn't the map itself, but the idea that someone, somewhere, knew and wanted you to know. Because what is a map, if not an act of rebellion against forgetting? It says, this mattered. This place was real. Look, see for yourself. And you, standing there in that quiet room, leaning over that fragile parchment, you realize something else. The Pyrie Reis map was never just about geography. It was a message in a bottle, a defiance of silence, a last breath from a drowned world. And it made it to shore, to you. So now the question is, what will you do with it? Will you file it under myth? Or will you follow its lines, past ice and fire, past memory and myth, to the place where truth still breathes? Because the cartographer left one last secret. It wasn't in the annotations. It wasn't in the coastline. It was in the act itself. He dared to draw the impossible. And in doing so, he remembered. Now, it's your turn. Let's say it plainly, just once. Atlantis was never lost. Not in the sense we've been taught to understand loss. Because what is truly lost? A city? A map? A myth? Or the belief that such a place could have ever existed at all? You've spent this journey piecing together the fragments, following the gold-threaded veins of a story too old to have one author. You've stood in temples with missing ceilings, read the stories etched into obsidian, watched as glaciers cracked and revealed bones no one expected to find, and still no coordinates, no treasure, no confirmation. So what did you find? Maybe you found something better, because Atlantis was never just a continent. It was a symbol, a frequency, a way of being that existed once, and refuses to die. It lives not in sand or stone, but in the ache behind your eyes when you look at the ocean and feel like something's calling you. It breathes in the moments between sleep and waking, when your mind slips out of the cage of modernity and remembers how to listen. It speaks not in English or Greek or Sumerian, but in a language of resonance. The feeling that you came from somewhere more graceful, more luminous, more whole. A civilization that did not just build with tools, but with intention, that aligned cities with stars not for superstition, but because they understood that the cosmos was not decoration. It was instruction that healed with vibration, that saw the body as a temple, the earth as a mirror, the soul as a blueprint, that believed memory could be held in stone, and wisdom could be sung into water, that disappeared not by chance, but by choice. Because the truth is, Atlantis was never just destroyed. It was sealed, folded inward like a lotus in winter, waiting, dormant, not dead. And those who carried its seed, they didn't write books. They didn't build pyramids. They became us, the dreamers, the stargazers, the ones who walk a little slower near the sea, who feel homesick for something they've never seen. That's Atlantis. Not under the waves, but in your bones, in your hunger, in your refusal to settle for a world that only worships what it can weigh. Because if Atlantis is anything, if it was ever real, then it wasn't an island. It was a reminder that humanity once aimed higher, not taller, not richer, but deeper, that we once believed in integration over domination, vibration over control, coherence over conquest. And if we remembered that, truly remembered, we wouldn't need to find Atlantis. We'd rebuild it, not with blueprints, but with consciousness, not in stone, but in each other. You've walked through this story like a pilgrim through fog, barefoot, aching, half-blind, and yet, somehow, more awake than you've ever been. And now that the path ends, you realize it was never a map at all. It was a mirror, and what you saw in it, the fire, the water, the fall, the silence, the map that shouldn't exist, was not Atlantis. It was you. Because Atlantis doesn't need to be found. It needs to be remembered. And that remembering begins now. Not in a museum, not in a book, but here, at the edge of sleep, where myths live, where dreams speak, where the sea waits. Atlantis was never lost. It was just waiting for you to come home.